My name is Barry Givens. I am one of the managing partners at Collab Capital, a new investment firm focused on investing in innovative Black entrepreneurs. I'm also the managing director for the Techstars Social Impact Program here in Atlanta, and I am a serial entrepreneur.
So my name is Justin Dawkins. I'm one of three managing partners for Collab Capital. I'm also the Google Digital Coach here in Atlanta, as well as the co-founder of social impact organization, Goody Nation.
Excellent. Thanks, guys, again for joining today. So my main motivation to get you guys here is kind of just to look at things in a sense of, obviously wanted to talk about Collab Capital, but I'm looking at today's time and what all of this is going to mean for the sustainability and the continued movement of the tech community in the Southeast. And as the conversation has shifted a little bit towards the inclusion of people who are traditionally considered minorities, and now we look at them as either people of color or whatever the terminology is, we're seeing that there's a renewed, maybe not even renewed, but a new interest possibly in investment dollars, in capital, in funding, in opportunities. And my curiosity is this a moment in time? Is this something that we're going to see sustained? And from your perspectives, being that Collab Capital has been in the news very deservingly lately for what you've done and being ahead of the curve, I thought it would be good to talk to you. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is the $50 million that you will be, that you now are intended to use for the initiatives that you're talking about. So I wanted you to kind of just explain that, because when people, I think, hear $50 million, they start asking questions about, do they have the $50 million yet? What's going to happen with those funds? Who are the LPs, limited partners? So just give us an idea of what it means for Collab Capital and this $50 million.
Sure.
Oh, it's a debate. Who's going to go first?
So I'll kind of start at the beginning of just raising a fund, right? And so people launch funds differently. Sometimes people launch after it's already raised. Sometimes people launch when they have the idea. We're somewhere in the middle. And so we decided to go ahead and launch at a point where we were actually fundraising. And we're headed to, in August, what's called a first close. That's where you close the first subset of money in your fund so that you can actually start implementing the plan and the structure that you put in place. And so right now we're on track, actually ahead of schedule, of closing the first $10 million by the end of August. And then we'll have a 12-month span where we raise the rest of the 40 for the fund. And you can do that because a fund typically is structured to run over multiple years. And so our fund will run over a 5-year investment period where we'll make, somewhere between 10 to 15 investments a year into Black founders. And then also, if you do the math, we write average checks $350. You'll realize there's still a lot of money left on the table, right? If people are out and they're listening, they're doing the math. And so also with the $50 million fund, what it allows us to do is, along with the initial checks that we write into companies, we will have a portion of our fund that's allocated to follow on into the companies that are doing extremely well and need another couple of $1 million to continue to scale. And so that's what's called having follow-on capital left to invest in your portfolio after you made initial investments in companies. So that's kind of how the money will flow. That's how that's how we'll allocate the money over the next 5 years.
Excellent. Now, one question that I immediately have to follow up, and if you guys want to volley off of each other or whoever picks up, not really any rules here. Again, it's quarantine time, so we're just playing it as it goes. But I wanted to ask you, when people see an announcement such as this, and, it's been picked up by TechCrunch, it's been picked up by other publications, which it should be. But a lot of times people may not understand what goes into even getting up to that speed, aside from, of course, fundraising and, talking to people in a network of folks who can invest. How long has this been in the making? What kind of had to lead up to the point to where we would even see an announcement? Because clearly it does not happen. Success doesn't happen overnight in any case, but I'm sure $50 million doesn't just appear in a fund, so tell us about what it took to get where we are today.
Well, I'll start, and Barry, I'll let you bring it home. If you want to start from the beginning, it really starts around 2012, when the three of us, Jewel, Barry, and myself, started our companies. Very different companies. Jewel and Barry actually competed in a few pitch competitions against each other, which is always an interesting story. But we all had a very different journey. But there were some things that were kind of common, and that was the challenge around fundraising. And I was in San Francisco most of 2013 building my SaaS startup. Barry was working on Masseur, and Jewel was working on PartPick. And they actually worked almost side by side. They were in the same office building and space that their offices were like literally next to each other. But during that process, during those early years of our companies, the challenge around fundraising was one thing that was consistent. I was a solo founder, so I was getting really interesting and odd and terrible term sheets as a solo founder. There was always a question of risk. Can you build it? Did you build it? I'm a full stack software engineer, and I have been for 20 years, but apparently, that was a question at the time. And so it starts with the fundraising journey. And so when as we became friends over time, just being in the small, much smaller entrepreneurial ecosystem, tech startup ecosystem here in Atlanta, when it was small for everybody, and particularly small for Black entrepreneurs, we decided that as we continue to work on our ventures and our endeavors, that we wanted to always make sure that those that came behind us had a platform, you can call it our shoulders, if you will, and did not have to start where we left off. They shouldn't have to. That's not how ecosystems work. That's not how networks should work. You shouldn't have to do that. And so after exiting our ventures at various stages and various times, we found ourselves in a very unique moment together, actually around celebrating a birthday. And I bumped into Barry, as I often did, just randomly. And
it was actually around this time because Jewel's birthday is on Friday. So It was probably within 2 weeks it was at her birthday party. So yeah, go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, no, but that's a great handoff. So I was just having a catch up conversations as you typically do with friends, and I asked Barry how he was doing, and as I do with people I care about, and it started out as as Black men do, as we typically do, just kind of like, I'm all right. But this time, today, Barry didn't give that answer, and I'm thankful for that, because he actually was very transparent about how he was feeling and what he was experiencing, and he asked me to meet him up at the gathering spot, I think a few weeks later. I can't remember the timing on it. And he wanted to talk to me about something. And it was the genesis of Collab. It was before we named it. We actually hadn't decided on the name, but we knew it was something that we wanted to do. And yeah, so that's kind of the Jewel and Zach's Jewel's husbands, their birthday celebration was kind of an inflection point for me. But I know that the origins of the vision of what the platform of Collab could be started a little bit before that with Barry, which I think it was a good point to get his perspective and his orientation on it.
Yeah, I mean, you did a great job with kind of the origin of. I mean, most of this was birthed out of our own experiences, but I'll kind of actually fast forward. Because after that, and we all came together, one of the things I think you mentioned, Mike, is like, this doesn't happen overnight. And it was great that we had to build up our own, which I think everyone does. You have to build up your own resume, for lack of better terms. So that's what we were doing from 2012 to 2017, just kind of getting relationships, earning respect. But even more difficult is that Black people haven't really been invited into the investment room. And so it's not just on the founder side where Black people are missing. It's also on the partner side of actual venture capital firms. I mean, venture capital was started before Black people could even vote, right? Like, so this isn't something that Black people were a part of in the early stages. And so one thing that you run into when you're starting a fund is many people don't want to invest in first-time fund managers. But as a Black person, how many people can say that they're not first-time fund managers when you're not getting opportunities in the actual funds themselves? And then no one will invest in you because no one wants to invest in a first-time fund manager. And you don't have a bunch of family and friends walking around with hundreds of millions of dollars to fund you out of just relationship like many other demographics do. And so for us, we were all founders, so no finance background. We're first-time fund managers, and we're all Black. And so this was something that most people would say, don't even get out of the bed and work on this, right? Like you're wasting your time. And it took a lot of courage for us to like build up to say, you know what, we are going to raise a fund. We started at 10 million back in 2018 when we kind of first said we were going to do it. And then like through 2019, we stuck with this like 10 million number. And then finally we were like, no, like we don't have to do what other people think is possible. Like we can go out, like we have the pedigree, we have the skill set, we have the background to go out and raise a $50 million fund that one gives us the ability to do what I talked about earlier, which is follow on and invest deeper into these Black founders. But two, gives us the operational capital to build a team to put the resources and the help that we need internally to operate a fund successfully. And so like literally end of last year, we upped it from 10 to 50 and decided to embark on this journey. And to your point, this hasn't been an overnight thing, right? We've been doing this help Black founders thing for, since we started, right? And so it's just we're happy now that the world has caught up, and that it's actually been helping us on the fundraising edge of things.
So that's a really good place to for me to come in with the next question I have is that we are, to timestamp this video a bit, we are, of course, in the summer of 2020, where we're seeing, civic movements, protests, demonstrations, people speaking up for what they think is an obvious sort of moment to display a lot of racial inequities and inequalities, specifically to the African American experience. And with technology, there's been this conversation for a long time, but there has been, of course, there's been a push with everything that we've seen with the George Floyd scenario, with the Ahmaud Arbery scenario, with the Breonna Taylor scenarios, with all of these incidents of police brutality and unarmed Black people being killed. There's also been a movement towards justice, and there's been a movement towards ways that people can help. So obviously there's been new opportunities for organizations of all sorts, businesses, but even we're seeing in tech that there's been these opportunities for them to get funded. My question is, when we look at that, and I think that you kind of spoke to this a bit in some of the recent interviews that you gave, but I'm wondering, A, is that something that you all are having to pay attention to make sure that sustainability is there? And B, with that being the case, are you seeing that there's sort of maybe a caught off guard scenario? Because what I'm looking at is that a lot of people that I've talked to, some of my friends who have different initiatives that they're involved in that could use funding, all of a sudden everyone wants to give it to them. And they may not have the infrastructure in place, because who would have known that all of a sudden this great amount of money could flow into places? I mean, honestly, we had seen with the coronavirus pandemic, which I left out, there was a lot of layoffs, furloughs, challenges. And then all of a sudden you see, well, there is actually money there to be available. And I think a lot of people are caught off guard and they're thinking, wait, I'm not ready and equipped to even capture and collect this opportunity to fund my organization and my dream. So A, how do you make sure that this funding is sustainable past this period in time? And then B, how would you suggest to people who should be taking advantage of this and need to get their stuff together? Like, what are some of the things that they need to do that even if they were doing already or that you would normally suggest that they really should be like focusing in on to make sure that they're able to, be in a good position while this is happening, even if it's not sustainable?
Yeah. So
Go ahead, Barry.
I'll say I'll speak to our end and I'll let Justin kind of speak to the community side of it. From a collab perspective, honestly, and it's unfortunate that the opportunity has to come with such sacrifice, and such negativity behind how we ended up here. But it's the saying where preparation meets opportunity. If you dream big enough, you're always ready, right? Like, and so whenever you're building something, the same way we did, we could have started with the $5 million fund, and then when people started wanting to dump money into us, there are many investors that we're talking to that write $5 million checks, right? And so we wouldn't have been able to take advantage of that. But by us starting and going into a $50 million fund, it really opens up all the opportunities. And so we were prepared. And it's because we built and structured what we were doing in a way that we can absorb pretty much anything, like outside of someone wanting to write us $100 million check. Like, we can absorb it. We plan for it. We have a strategy for it. And also coming from a fund perspective, this is a personal Barry thought. This is not a Collab Capital on the record. This is a Barry Gibbons on the record. I don't trust or think any of this stuff that's happening right now is sustainable. We've been here before. Businesses do things for business reasons. They write, 5 million, 2 million, 1 million, 100,000, whatever their number is that they're doing. They write these checks. And in 2 years, when we're not thinking about this anymore, it's not like this is going to be an annual, we're giving, $2 million away to support, Black economic justice, right? So the thing that we have to do is capture everything that's happening right now. And from a fund perspective, funds tend to operate, as I mentioned earlier, in multi-year stints. So we don't need them in 3 years to be there, because we can actually capitalize on getting the investment now and then putting the money in the hands of the entrepreneurs that will hopefully, when we go raise our fund 2 in 5 years, then we have a track record, we have success, and then we can actually go raise $100 million fund next. So for me, this is the sustainability, but it's built into what we're building in our fund, right? But I don't think that if organizations are out there depending on this being their bread and butter, every year corporations are going to give me $1 million to operate my nonprofit or to do XYZ, they have to prove it to me first that this is going to be a longevity thing, because none of them have proved it in the past. I mean, this happened several years ago with Eric Garner when people started hiring D&I directors. And next thing you know, I'm friends with a lot of people in those positions, and you talk to them 2 years later and their budget got cut in half. And they couldn't even do anything internally from a D&I perspective because they weren't given the resources. And so they quit and moved on to somewhere else. But initially it was a big thing because all these big companies hired D&I directors. And so all this stuff is typically a flash in the pan. I'm hoping that it sticks this time, but I'm not expecting it to.
I can take some of what Barry said. I think that the question that we've been asking ourselves over the last few weeks, months, and sometimes years, depending on who you are, is what is the origin of change? And I always say, to my mentees and to my family and loved ones, and they ask me about change, like when's it going to come? And I always say, change occurs when the pain, right? The pain of the pain of the moment outweighs the pains of change, right? So it takes energy, and it takes a little bit of hurt sometimes, some pain to actually, to change your ways, to change your thoughts. You think about, weightlifting, right? You got to endure a little bit of pain to build that muscle. And so I think that looking at it through the lens of, whether this is a morally right thing to do or financially right thing to do, or if it's just a response or a reaction, I think that ultimately the question we have to ask ourselves, and the challenge, to Barry's point, to everyone, is what is it really going to take? And a lot of this, the money is a good, I guess, first step for some people, because sometimes they'll write the checks before they actually make the stance, right? Like one of the things that I'm really big on, this kind of will point to the second part of your question is, are you writing this check as a pacifier, or are you writing this because you know the change that needs to actually occur needs to be underwritten, right? It's going to take human capital, it's going to take people, it's going to take resources, and you know that it's going to take more than a year's worth of capital to do it, right? And so if the answer to that question is it's a reaction, I will say thank you for the check, and let's go figure out how to do this every year for the next 20 years, because that's what it's going to take. It's not going to be a flash in the pan. And so when I think about organizations and kind of those that are on the ground, the ecosystem builders that are fighting, that weren't necessarily prepared for this moment, I think that through a similar lens and through a similar purview, I think it's important to remember that this is not a 1 year thing. Again, like for them, it's get prepared, because I hope it's not I think Barry used the perfect word. I hope it's not the same sacrifice or anything similar, but I hope it's actually systemic change that needs more support, and your organization will be in place once the laws get passed, once the long-term commitments are made, and they have to start thinking about scale. And a lot of these organizations, these community organizations, these entrepreneurial support resources, whatever the cause or the mission may be, they're going to be needed more than they are now. And so I think organizations that have been preparing, or at least are built to catch as much as they can in this moment, as it kind of seemingly falls from the sky, that's great. That means they can get on the ground right now. They can go out and get into the streets, and they can actually do the work right now. But I also believe that it's not enough. Collab isn't enough. We know it's not enough. We could do a $500 million fund, and I don't think it would be enough. But I think it's a good start, and it's our hope that what we're doing is establishing a trend for not just Black capital and Black access, but really, if you talk about equality, it's for everybody. It's for us to finally get what we've been fighting for, which again, it's not revenge. It's not any semblance of that. It's equality. We just want the same opportunities to grow and thrive and survive in our communities and be around the people that we care about along the way. That's what everybody wants. And so I know that's a long answer, but those are my thoughts. And I think that's how organizations can think about it, is like, it's okay. Get prepared now, though. It can happen. That these moments will likely occur, or something, again, hopefully not similar, but the need for you is going to only grow. It's not shrinking.
Well, yeah, no, that's a great answer. It was a long question, so got to take a long answer when you have a long question. So that brings me to, thinking about, I'm sure that Collab has in mind, obviously, the types of businesses, the types of startups, the types of any founders who kind of show the talent, the skills, and the understandings, and just the preparedness for being in a position to where Collab would be interested. What I'm wondering is, are you seeing them look at, when you're having these conversations, when you're meeting people who are looking for investment and looking for capital, are you seeing that they're also sort of thinking about how their success is leading to other opportunities? Is that sort of starting to reflect a little bit more than usual because of everything going on right now? Because obviously you have folks like everyone is bringing up Killer Mike right now here in Atlanta, and I remember going to the conversation he had with my man from Twitter, Jack Dorsey, and that was at Monday Night Garage, and there was about this, I think it was compassionate capitalism was a term, if I remember correctly, that Killer Mike was using. So, we're in this moment where there's a lot of talk about how organizations and businesses can be helpful and be allies to the community. But of course, a lot of that is going to be weighed upon what the success of that business is going to be before they can do anything else. So are you seeing among folks who are looking to collab and who are looking to get investment, are they seeming to be more aware of what their roles and responsibilities are, or is that even something that's coming up? Because I'm wondering, is a social component being amplified more than it would usually be in this time?
I won't say any more than normal. I mean, you have people that care and you have people that don't. And I think it's up to the investor to invest in that person just as much as they invest in a business. And I think this is where Silicon Valley has failed a lot, right? Where they don't really care how that founder and that entrepreneur that they're going to try to turn into a billionaire and, you know, become an extremely powerful person in the world. They don't care what that person's personality is as long as it makes them a lot of money. And we're not the same way. There are good people. You don't have to sacrifice. I guess I'm not sure what the compassionate capitalism means. I'm assuming it's somewhere in this vein. You don't have to sacrifice being capitalistic and making a profit and making money with doing it with someone that doesn't give a shit, right? And so even, and this expands beyond what we do at Collab. This is how I look at Techstars when I'm investing in a founder. This is how I look at who I'm mentoring, who I'm advising. I ask a lot of questions like, what do you do? Like, I want to learn about that person. What do you care about? Because if I do get in your corner and get behind you and help you make a bunch of money, just think about how many people are showing up on these like lists of who's supporting who politically. And it's like, oh, this person is on the board of this company that is supporting something. It's like, whoa, I don't believe in that. I just made an investment, right? And I never want that to happen. I want it to be Collab is supporting founders. And that's part of the engine that we're trying to create, in that we invest in somebody like our first investment here, Brella and Tracy Pickett, right? Like we invest in Tracy. When Tracy makes $100 million, Tracy's trying to do what we're doing, right? Tracy's trying to come right behind and become an investor and invest in her community. Me and Tracy grew up in Stone Mountain, right? She went to Steve's and I went to Stone Mountain. Like we're trying to get back into our communities and give back. And we know that Tracy's going to do that or we would not have written her a check. And so you have to do more due diligence on the person because there's plenty of people that have the same ideas. And so that's part of what we're doing at Collab. And if you don't have the same mentality that we have or show some semblance of it, we won't write you a check no matter how good the idea is, because that is just as important. Because our fund's going to be successful. There are enough dope Black people out there with great ideas that have the right mindset that we can pass up on the bad eggs that aren't going to do right.
Well, we want to talk about Hair Brella, because that is something when I saw it, you know, I guess if you're thinking about tech in the traditional sense, it's like, well, this is not a SaaS, this is not a platform, but it is something when I looked at it, and honestly, as an African-American man, I'm always thinking about, oh, wow, we really don't have as much of a foothold in the beauty and that industry as we should because of our ability and our spending power as Black people and how much we actually contribute to the basic bottom line of how much this whole industry pulls in annually and forever. So when I saw that, I said, I really am very interested in why this was the first, you know, main, like the newsworthy investment. It's like, here we're going in here. Because I would have assumed that it would be some, you know, Georgia Tech graduate with something like, I remember seeing Barry, you know, I don't know if he remembers, but I remember seeing him with his cocktail machine and everything, and I was just like, man, I'm like, because I drink, so I'm like, hey, like, I can get down with whatever this is. Like, here's $5 to the cause. I mean, right. Cocktail. But I remember that, so I was just thinking, wow, that's a very significant move. And it showed to me a way of thinking that is, obviously a startup does not have to be something that has an algorithm involved with it. But when I looked at that, I said, this is something to where they probably looked at this and said, okay, it's already got the good projections and numbers, and there's a foundation there that makes good business sense, but it's also an entree into something where we should be a little bit more, as African Americans, a little bit more on the side of profiting from something that we're so heavily invested in. So I just thought that was a really interesting case of where to start from. So talk a little bit about that, like how that ended up being the jumping off point of saying, we're here and here's where we're starting.
I'll start. Barry can probably get into the mechanics on it. I think the thing that probably stands out most about Herbrella is actually Tracy. I think the founder is where we started that investment. We Jewel actually started to build a relationship very early with Tracy early in the process. I think one of their first interactions, I'm not rewriting history here, but Tracy actually gave Jewel a prototype. Like, she just gave her one of her products just to have in her hand. And she ended up using it. I think she gave her a couple. And she ended up using it a couple times, especially after it rains. She got her hair done. All the classic use cases of the Hairbrella. And I think Jewel fell in love with the product right away and saw that this was useful for her. But then in the conversations that she had, and I hope I'm over speaking for Jewel, but I think that she realized that there was something special about Tracy, and that should be invested in. The platform, as you brought up before, yeah, it's not SaaS, it's not an automated bartending machine, but the platform is actually Tracy, and it's a mindset that she has about building a business, ensuring that it's profitable. She's not hell-bent on building a business that she may not identify or recognize in 3 to 4 or 5 years, which often happens with these high growth companies, which is, well, it started out as one thing and then it turned into something totally different. Tracy has a very, very, very beautiful and specific vision for her company. And the culture of that is what you want to permeate when you start talking about creating jobs, right? You start talking about building wealth. The reason that some of these companies are so terrible culturally is because of how they started. The founding teams, the leadership, the investors into the companies, they all have a particular mindset, and that permeates down through leadership all the way down to that individual employee. And so I think when we think about the platform, when we think about Collab, what we're investing in is people that created very innovative ideas, that have a good to healthy profit margin, and that ultimately the founders and the people that are running that business, they want to see their community thrive as their products and their innovations thrive.
Yeah, that's the like I said, the impact side of it. And then from a business perspective, we have a profit sharing based model, and so we need products that can scale and that can scale in a profitable manner, right? And then we also have a collaborative model where we work with people in the community, in the Black community, from influencers to corporate executives, people that can help lower customer acquisition costs that would actually help increase profitability. And when you look at a company like Hairbrella, extremely profitable from a growth perspective. And so from a net perspective, if we can lower the amount of time and money it takes to get those into people's hands, if we can help her get a corporate contract that's $2 million a year, and with no customer acquisition costs, that's pretty much all profit at that point. And then all of a sudden, this is a very, very like almost venture level lucrative business to us as investors and to our LPs. And so being able to have a business like this, and the last part is just to get into, so people that are listening understand, this is still an innovative business, right? And I equate it to something like a Spanx, right? Where yes, it's not technology, but this is something that no one else is doing. It's solving a problem that similar to how only a woman could solve the Spanx problem, like Sarah Blakely did for her own purposes. This is something that a Black woman needed to solve, something that they deal with. She was in the middle of it. She ran into this problem while in law school and, getting her hair done, going on interviews. And so, like, this was a problem that someone needed to innovate in out of that community, right? And out of the Black woman community. And she did it. And this is something that can be as big as any rain protection company that exists out there today. It just happened to start with a Hairbrella. But this can be ponchos, it can be umbrellas, it can be shoes, shoe covers, it can be purse covers. Like, this thing can expand and scale out at a massive level. And it starts with an extremely patentable product that was built by a patent attorney. So you talk about having something protected, like, this is literally what she did. And so everything about her background, about her story, and being the perfect person to solve the perfect problem, it all made sense. And then when you drop that on top of this, an extremely high margin business, it made sense for our model as well.
Okay, because really I was concerned for y'all because I'm like, I know y'all getting calls like, yo, I have something too for hair, and how come y'all didn't hit me up? I'm like, well, patent attorney making a highly patentable thing with all these other things involved. I'm like, that's kind of like a strong argument. But yeah, I'm sure y'all probably getting a whole lot of phone calls and emails about similar products. But
That's why I wanted to go a little deeper. I wanted to make sure that people listening understood that this isn't just, we're not investing in every business that's, it has to be something innovative and new, and something that is protectable.
so let's talk about that and making sure that you said that people understand that from the side of who you might invest in those founders. Looking at it on a higher scale from even where you are, who's advising the three partners of Collab? Who's advising you, and who are you looking at for the type of mentorship that being fund managers and partners, who do you look to and say, these are examples of what we should do? Are those folks kind of, actively advising? And obviously you have a board or advisors involved in the fund in general. But even are there people outside of who you would normally interact with just to make sure the wheels on Collab continue to roll? Are how important are people who can advise on keeping your eyes on the right, goals and targets and the bigger picture for Collab? Because that's one thing I think, as you said, that being a first-time fund manager has its own challenges besides being African American, besides all of these other things that people are going to look at and have their own reasons to scrutinize. What do you use, and who are you leaning on, and who has provided any kind of guidance that's been helpful as you get Collab really revving up right now?
Yeah, so we have not announced or finalized our official by paperwork advisor board. That's something we're in the middle of now. I'm hoping to be announcing this summer. But along the way, it was very important, not just for us to make sure we were doing it properly, but also, like I said, as first-time fund managers, we wanted to make sure that people outside of us understood that we were serious about this. And so we spent about 6-7 months with Kaufman, who is, I would say, they literally train venture capitalists. So they actually just announced the Kaufman Fellow, the class for this year. But we spent 6-7 months with them before we showed it to anyone else, with them just kicking the tires on our model, asking questions, making sure the financials made sense, making sure that the model over time would make sense. And that honestly gave me the confidence, and then gave the team the confidence to then go out and put it in front of other people and say, this thing has been thoroughly vetted. Like, we've been through the ringer with one of the top-notch investor advisor companies in the world. And then they turned around and, made the largest investment to date that we have in the fund. And so not only did they help us kick the tires on the model, but then they also, after all that was done, they decided that the model was so good that they wanted to be one of the first investors. And so they put their money where their mouth was long before, it became a sexy thing to invest in Black people, right? So they were doing this work long before. And so along with that, I think, which we don't give props because these are just kind of conversations that you have, right, with friends almost. And so conversations with people like Marlon Nichols from Mac, who, sat down and had a couple dinners with him. And he doesn't know it, but that was advisorship to me. Him asking questions helped me think about things differently and how we were structuring the fund, how we would launch it, things of that nature. People, like the guys from 645 Ventures. I know Jules spent a lot of time with them. And so there are these kind of Black investors and white. You have Bryce from NBVC, who has a similar model to us that he started, back in 2012. So being able to watch him and see what he's doing. So there are a lot of people in the industry that have kind of been there along the journey that may not be official advisors, but people that have definitely at least dropped a nugget or two into how we move forward with how we built the fund.
So I wanted to ask you a question because I'm seeing this on the side of media. There's been no deceleration of accelerators. Lots of accelerators out there. And I know, especially here in Atlanta, as the ecosystem and the community of tech and innovative startups has sort of, built up some excitement around it. I mean, I know some folks from the entertainment industry have been some of the folks who are investing with Collab Capital. Or at least that's what it looks like the reports are out there saying. As more people are aware of this and more people are deciding, okay, maybe this is an opportunity for me, I'm noticing that there are a lot of accelerators just out there. And so can you kind of go into the difference of what folks should be mindful of if they are a startup and they're looking to get the types of funding opportunities that are out there? Are all of these accelerators, where should they be? What should they look for when they're entering into these kind of programs? When you're talking about, the investment information and the training that you got from Kaufman, these kinds of things, these mentorships, this advisory role that people can play who have some information. It seems like there's a lot of folks who are also willing to see, oh, there's something here and there's a revenue opportunity in me starting an accelerator. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but some of these startups may not even understand that in itself is something that they may need to at least do a little bit of their own homework and due diligence on. So talk to me a little bit about, what maybe if I'm a startup and I read this story about Collab Capital and this $50 million, and I want to get myself together, and I'm really serious, and I have the energy and the vision, and I can get myself together. What should they be doing on the way? And are these accelerators really helpful, or what would you tell them to just watch out for?
Justin, I will gladly let you kick this one off, and I have to run for like 2 seconds to go give my son something. So Justin, I'll start, and I'll be right back.
Cool. So as a co-founder of a pre-accelerator, I think one thing that I always say is check the track record, right? So if it's a newer accelerator, then you want to look at the track record of those that are funding the accelerator, or at least the track record of the person or individuals that are backing it. A great way to do that is ask about the mentor advisory board. To the question that you just asked us, ask about the mentor and advisory board. Who's helping to guide this ship? Because that's important to know. A, what are the motivations and what's really driving the mission forward? But B, you really need to understand that these are investors in your business, right? So, our fiduciary responsibility as people managing other people's money, right, through the investment fund. We have to know our investors. We have to ask certain questions. We need to know what their motivations and intentions are, so that we are aware, and also to make sure they're accredited, but ultimately is to make sure that we are aware of the people that are on our cap table. So as we start to return money, we're not funding some salacious, or maybe evil thing. We need to understand those things. So I think the first step is knowing your investor. The second one, and I think founders aren't as mindful as sometimes those that may be evaluating those applications and the diligence process on the front end. Timing is incredibly important to particularly early to the trajectory and the success of a startup. There have been many great individuals and many good companies built at the wrong time, for different reasons, right? So infrastructure. I talk about Uber a lot. I use the example of Uber and Lyft. And they were not the first ones to try, click to call a cab. I was like, Google had a button on their homepage in I think 99 or 2000. It was literally press the button and it called a cab. But the network effects weren't there. Smartphones, mobile applications, all these things weren't present. And so you can have a great idea, but it can be too soon, or you can be late to the party as well. And so I think it's important that when you're looking at accelerators, whether it's a pre-accelerator or accelerator, look at where the stage that you're in, and then go have discussions with founders that have actually been through the program to figure out where they were when they started and where they ended when they completed the program. Because the accelerator institution, if you will, the accelerator idea is built on founders being at a certain stage, aggregating together and using their collective inertia to accelerate them all, right? So that's because they put them in a bunch. That's why they call them a batch or a cohort. And so if you're too early, you won't get the most out of it. And it may even slow you down in some way. And if you're too late, right, like meaning you're too far along, then sometimes the programming can actually slow you down, right? So I think it's important to be mindful of who your investors are going to be, because if they're writing you a check type of accelerators, then there's backing there. So you need to make sure that you understand that. But then also understand the stage of your business and what it is that you hope to get out of it, and does that align? So talking to founders is a great, founders that have been through the program is a great way to kind of get some insight on that side of. I'm thinking of speaking specifically about the founder side of that decision. I think it's that's the best way to approach it, or the first two things I would do.
Excellent. Well, guys, we're getting short on time, so I have two last questions. First question is, of course, what is next for Collab Capital? So, and what's next for each of you in your own ventures? Because again, Collab is not all that you do, which is awesome. Everybody needs to have more than one job. I have Jamaican stepfathers, so that's been beaten into my head extremely hardcore.
3 jobs.
Yeah. And after that question, if you want to just roll right into the second one, tell me one thing that you are doing, because, again, as everything else is going on, we are still currently in a pandemic, and you all are clearly at the house, and your athleisure look is really nice. I want to commend y'all on that. It's a tech lifestyle all the way. You're true to form. But tell me one thing, what's next for yourselves individually, business-wise, for Collab Capital, if that's just one answer between the two of you. But then what you're kind of doing to take care of yourself, at the house, and just you time, self-care wise.
All right, I'll go first. So next for me, honestly, is raising the rest of this fund. I mean, obviously that's kind of that's number one from a collab perspective. I have applications that'll be opening back up middle of July for my next Techstars class. That'll be ran from January through April 2021. And so those are going to be opening up later in July. And then also wanting to do a little more. And we touched on it earlier. I think Justin mentioned that Collab Capital, this isn't enough, right? Like this is where we're creating a long-term kind of like wealth gap reducing solution for our community. But also starting to dig into like what are some things that can make a big impact now. So we do have a 501(c) collab community that we're hoping to do some things with and do some more tactical on the ground. Like how do we get small businesses outside of just the innovation things that we're investing in? How do we help the small coffee shop? How do we help the small business here in Atlanta that needs to make, and not like you got your windows broke during the riot, right? It's more like, how do we set you up for long-term success as a business using our expertise and our resources? And so I would say between those three things, I don't have much time to run into the second question. Also having 2 kids at home, as you can see, they come this way, come draw on my board while I'm working as they're one of their favorite pastimes. And so having 2 kids at home, working on those 3 things, my self-care, and my wife hates when I say this, my self-care is my work, man. Like I was telling somebody the other day that between the work we're doing at Collab, my work at Techstars, like I have been a part of giving away about $1.7 million to African-American people in the past 6 months. Most investors that have been doing it for 10 years haven't hit that mark. And so doing things like that and doing it with really good founders and like people that I'm seeing that I'm helping that probably wouldn't have got help otherwise. And they deserve the help. It's not like it's a charity. Like these are people that earned the opportunity to be on these stages. That is enough for me. Like that's self-care for me. I can sleep like a baby at night. I'm happy doing the work. I'm happy staying up all night if I have to. Like that is my self-care doing this work. And so I know that's kind of a crazy answer, but that's all I got. I just work a lot.
Barry hit the nail on the head as far as like next steps for Collab. You know, our goal is very clear, succinct. It's raise this fund and start to, you know, or continue to deploy capital to amazing founders and their businesses. On the self-care front, Barry's not that crazy because mine is very similar. I enjoy this work. It brings me joy. Sometimes the things that I read in the news or the things that we see on television are, you know, deeply concerning and upsetting. And so that can add fuel to the fire. My job lately has just been channeling it properly, to not let it emotionally exhaust me or burn me out. And really just finding more ways to disrupt the wealth gap. You know, and I think that's kind of a new mantra that Barry and I picked up, and Jewel, we picked it up and we need to disrupt the wealth gap in this country. And it's not going to be just a $50 million fund. It's going to be this one and the one after, but it's going to be initiatives like Collab Community. It's going to be initiatives like Collab Studio, which is all about preparing founders, as we talked about, Mike, is getting founders ready for the next major milestone in their business. So whether that's engagement and marketing and business development, or getting ready to raise capital, and everything in between. So those are the things that I'm passionate about. And my self-care routine is usually doodling in a book, one of my little moleskins or field notebooks, more ideas that I may just write about or share out. But I just get, there's just joy and a sense of resolve in exploring ways to help my people. So that's my self-care routine, and loving on my wife, rubbing her feet, rubbing her shoulders. That actually at home really makes me, actually brings me some calm sometimes. It makes it real for me again. So that's my self-care routine.
Awesome, because I was gonna say, man, y'all brothers, y'all need to make sure y'all make time for a pedicure every once in a while, man. You know, as black men, you know, I think we sometimes have a thing against getting our feet done up and everything.
I've never had one before in my life.
Yeah. Get yourself a pedicure.
Barry, get you one, bro.
Get your pedicure.
Bro, it'll change
Matter
your
of
life.
fact, now I'm concerned for whoever's gonna get down there if you ain't never had one. It might be.
I didn't say I don't take care of myself. I stay clean and hygiene. I take care of my hygiene now, but I just never had another person at a shop pay somebody.
The brothers got to look out for each other.
Massage like 2 years ago.
Recommendation, man. And by the way, I have a startup coming out called Black Men Getting Their Feet Rubbed. So collab in that. Let's talk about, you know, some opportunities in the future. Brothers,
there's an innovation embedded in there. Let's do it. I'm curious to see what the innovation is. That sounds amazing to me. I ain't mad at it.
All right. Well, Justin Dawkins, Barry Givens, Collab Capital. Shout out to Jewel Burke-Solomon, who we will catch up with at some point. But thank y'all very much for y'all's time. I really appreciate it. I hope it's helpful for anyone out there who watches this video. We will, of course, keep up with you guys, be in touch with you soon. But congratulations, much more continued success, and the work ahead. I hope it continues to bring you joy, and I hope everything that you look forward to making happens in short time and continues to grow.
All right.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for telling our stories and giving us a platform.
Have a good one.
Really appreciate it.
Thank y'all, brothers. Y'all have a good one.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one.